Hi, today we're going to talk about the Concorde fuel system. It does look a bit complicated, but once you figure it out, it's not too bad. Basically, there's going to be 11 tanks on the plane, and we need to get all the fuel eventually into tanks 1, 2, 3, and 4. These are the ones that feed the engines, these 4 right here. And as long as these pumps stay on, the engines will stay filled with fuel, which is what you want. The next tanks up the line are 5, 6, 7, and 8. They each have 2 pumps, so you see pumps right there and there, there and there. We want to keep those on throughout the whole flight so they automatically fill 1, 2, 3, and 4. So our goal is really to get all the fuel into 5, 6, 7, and 8, because then it'll automatically transfer to 1, 2, 3, and 4. We do have auxiliary tanks 5A and 7A. Those will transfer into 7A to 7 and 5A to 5. We don't want that to happen automatically, though, because it does affect the center of gravity of the plane. The main effect on the center of gravity is going to be these 3 tanks here. We have tank 9, 10, and 11. Using those 3 tanks, we can transfer fuel back and forth. 9 and 10 are in the nose, and 11 is in the tail, and that'll affect our center of gravity quite a bit. Now, I've already configured the plane's fuel in the sim. I'm going from JFK to London today, and I want to take about 160,000 pounds of fuel. I have 159 loaded, that's close enough. As you can see, I have pretty much all my tanks full, aside from my transfer tanks here. Actually, I want to bring that up and this one down. Okay, so I have all my tanks full aside from my transfer tanks, 5A and 7A. Those are the auxiliary tanks. And then I have tank 10 is completely full, tank 9 is not quite completely full. I want to make sure between tanks 9, 10, and 11 that I at least have 1 tank completely full. That way I have enough ballast to move back and forth to trim the plane. As you can see, my white needle is between these 2 yellows, so that's good. These yellows are going to move down as we speed up, so we'll have to continue to transfer fuel to move the center of gravity, which is indicated by my white needle, back. So this is a typical loadout I would take for this flight. If you are doing a longer flight, you may need more fuel on the plane. You can max out tanks 5 and 7A. You can also max out tanks 9 and 11. You do want to leave a little bit of wiggle room in either tanks 11 or 9 and 10, so that way you can transfer fuel back and forth. Otherwise, you won't be able to get the proper center of gravity after takeoff. One of the things to keep in mind is you want to have a lot of the pumps off to start and all the inlet valves off to start. The only ones that I would say are the exception you want to leave running are the pumps for tanks 5 and 6, 7 and 8, and then all these pumps that transfer into the main engines. All the pumps you want to have off are the ones on tank 11. So there's pumps here, 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 and here. All those should be off. The inlet valves for tank 11 should be off. 5A's pump should be off. 7A's pump should be off over here. All these additional inlets should be off. All these should be off. These inlet valves for tanks 9 and 10 should be off. And of course, we do not want to jettison any fuel at this point, so these should be off and shut. So pretty much everything in the down position, aside from these 4 pumps here, these 4 pumps here, and these 6 and these 6. Everything else should be off. And that'll be a good way to start the flight. Today we're going to go over how to transfer fuel between tanks 9, 10, and 11 to balance your weight, and also how to eventually get that fuel into 5, 6, 7, and 8 so we can use it towards the end of the flight. So right now we are set up for takeoff. I'm going to take off and I'll come back in a few minutes. So at this point I'm passing through 15,000 feet and I'm starting to speed up. And as you can see, the yellow markers have moved forward, so I need to transfer some fuel forward. What I'm going to start by doing is turning on these 4 pumps. These 4 pumps control tanks 9 and 10. And then we're going to open the inlet valves, all 4 of them, on tank 11. That'll start the process of transferring fuel back. Or at least it should. For some reason, fuel is not moving at the moment. Oh, I don't have these pumps all the way on. I had them set to auto, which doesn't really work properly. So as you see, that was 51.4, I think. Now it's 51.6. So the fuel is transferring back. And we're going to keep that transferring right up until it gets to about 54 here. So if we go back to the cockpit, you can see that this indicator as well is saying that we're too far forward, even though it's not 100% accurate. But we're climbing at about 3,000 feet per minute, and you can see our speed is increasing to almost 350 knots at this point. As we do increase speed, we need to keep transferring more and more. Open a valve by mistake. Don't want to do that. Okay, so it is transferring back slowly. One thing that I'm going to do is stop the transfer temporarily. And we're going to open these valves right here. I'm going to turn off the pumps from tank 9. And what you see is all the fuel is going from tank 10 to tank 9. Basically, you can't directly transfer from tank 10 to tank 11. It has to go to tank 9 first. So filling up that does make it a little bit easier to make sure that transfer happens quickly. And you see the O full light. That means that this tank is full at this point. So I'm going to turn off these inlet valves because I don't want to transfer any more to tank 9 at the moment. And opening them up on tank 11, we should continue to transfer. Now, there is a glitch on this plane where sometimes opening just these pumps from tank 9 doesn't actually work. So you do sometimes need to open up the pumps on tank 10 as well, even if you're not transferring from tank 10. But it did go raise one up here, so it should be fine. Let me try running them all. So at this point, we are out of the center of gravity of the plane. We do need to get that taken care of, which is what I'm doing right now. I'm going to pause here, and we'll be back once that transfer is finished. So as you can see now, our white indicator is at the aft arrow, so we need to stop transferring fuel. So I'm going to close these valves all the way. These are the inlet valves for tank 11. And we want to turn off those pumps here. What I'd like to do is transfer the remainder of this fuel in tank 10 to tank 9 just to make it easier. So we're going to open these up. So I have the pumps on for tank 10 but off for tank 9, and I open these inlet valves. So now we have 0 fuel in this tank, and it's in tank 9 and 11 down there. We're going to turn off these inlet valves because we're not going to need to do that anymore. And now if we look on the fuel manager from the sim, you can see tank 10 has nothing in it. So we're going to be now only transferring between tank 9 and 11 for pretty much the remainder of the flight. So right now we're at 56. Until we get any faster, we're good to go. Right after that last transfer, we did make it to Mach 1 here. So we're going to continue climbing, and as we speed up some more, we'll need to make a couple more transfers back. We're now crossing Mach 1.4, and as you can see, we need to transfer more fuel again. So the same procedure as before, open these valves. You can open those side ones too, but I'm just using the big ones. And then we're going to turn on these pumps. And then we just want to verify that it is actually transferring. We're at 56.0. Wait a second or two and see if it's continues. And it doesn't look like it's transferring, so we're going to make sure these pumps are on, those valves are off. Let's try turning those on as well. Oh, it did go to 56.1. Okay, so it is transferring right now, and as you can see, this needle is dropping back. We're going to stop that transfer right around 59. So at this point, we're continuing to climb. I do have my afterburners on. That's the British Virtual Group livery for the virtual airline here. Back inside, we're almost done with that transfer. As you can see, we're at 60.2, so I actually let it go a little too long, but that's fine. So we're going to turn off these valves, turn off the pumps. So each one of these is 2 clicks to get it to turn. So everything should be off here at this point. We have a little bit of fuel in here still. This tank is actually full, so it won't transfer anymore. And we are good to go for supersonic flight. One of the things I want to make sure we do is transfer 5A and 7A into 7 and 5. So we're going to start that process by opening this valve and this valve. And we can turn on these two pumps. Now this will actually, when these are fully drained, they'll move our center of gravity about 1% forward, so it's actually okay that I went too far back because it's going to fix it right now. Now at this point in the flight we haven't burned off a ton of fuel yet, so these may light up as O full before I actually completely empty these tanks. If that happens, just leave them in this configuration and they'll continue to drain. This one lit up with O full, and 7A is not completely empty. If we look on the 7A still has 10% in it, and 5A is 6%. Looks like 5A is going to completely drain, but 7 won't. Yeah, so 5A is completely drained. 7A is at 8%, so I'm just going to leave this valve open and those two open, and it'll finish that transfer. Since this one's done in 5A, I'm going to close these three. And as you can see, the center of gravity went forward quite a bit there, from 60.1 to 59.3. The rest of 7A may bring that to 59. If not, we'll transfer a little bit of fuel and we'll be fine. So we've made it to the famous Mach 2. We're at about 54,000 feet, climbing up to 60,000. We're going to do a real slow climb for that last bit. And at this point, we want our center of gravity around 59, which we should be if I go back to the engineer's console. We're at 59.2. I'm just going to double check that valve here. So both 5A and 7A have completely transferred this time. You can see on this gauge right here, it's completely empty. So I'm going to turn off these tanks, turn off that inlet valve. So right now, all of the fuel is in 5, 6, 7, and 8, which will automatically dump into the main tanks that fire in the engine, 1, 2, 3, and 4, aside from a little bit of trim fuel that we have left in tank 9, and a little bit of trim fuel we have left in tank 11. So at this point, I'm going to cruise all the way to London, and I'll come back when we start our descent, when we do those last fuel transfers. So as we approach, we need to transfer fuel one more time. Tank 11 at this point has too much fuel in it because we're too far back here. So what I've been doing is turning on these pumps, and then opening these override valves. That's going to transfer the fuel directly into 5, 6, 7, and 8, which will drain into 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now the one thing we got to keep in mind is how much fuel we have in these trim tanks, because we may actually need that fuel depending on how much fuel you've used throughout the flight. So we may have needed to make these transfers earlier if we did indeed need that fuel. I am leaving a little bit of fuel in tank 9 here. The reason I'm leaving fuel in tank 9 is due to the fact that we will need a little bit in that trim tank to have proper center of gravity when we're going really slow, like at approach speeds. Of course, if you do need that fuel, it's more important to have fuel in the engines than have it properly trimmed. But to transfer fuel up that way, we're just going to open these valves right here, turn on these pumps if you did need to get more fuel into tank 10. Remember though, once you take the fuel out of these 3 tanks and transfer it into 5, 6, 7, and 8, there's no going back. So we want to be careful that we don't transfer too much fuel out of these tanks and then not have enough to be able to trim the plane. At this point though, tank 11 is almost empty, if not empty, and we do have it pretty well trimmed for landing. We may need to move it a little bit forward. If we do, what we would do is transfer from the front tanks to the rear, but we'll see how that goes. I'll check back in when we're closer to landing. So at this point we've landed. I do want to point out that even though I still have 4,000 kilograms of fuel in here, we're still at the aft edge of the center of gravity. So that's why you do need to have a little bit of fuel in the nose. If I completely drained this, we would not be in the proper center of gravity for landing. At this point, tank 11 is almost empty. If I emptied that completely, we'd be a little better. But basically, you want to keep that at least that 4,000 kilograms in there, unless you need that fuel. At this point, 5, 6, 7, and 8 are completely empty. 1, 2, 3, and 4 still have a decent amount of fuel in them. I actually landed with a little bit too much fuel. I landed slightly overweight. So you can see I have 23,400 pounds of fuel still on board. That's about 19,000 in these tanks right here, which I don't need all that fuel. That's another hour of flying at least. So, we did land a little bit overweight here today. Total aircraft weight is 115,380. That really should be 111 if you're within the maximum landing weight. Now, we do have a chart up front that tells you the landing weights based on your fuel load and your weight. Your weight's over here, landing is over here. It's hard to see on the video, but if you look at it in your own plane, you'll see that. But that's pretty much it. If you do have any questions about the fuel system, feel free to leave a comment. Also, I am not a professional Concorde pilot. I have not flown them in past sims. So if there's anything wrong here procedurally, I understand it's not going to be perfect, but following this guideline will help you fly the plane and at least get it from A to B.